Well, we've been on quite a ride the last month or so. If you've been here consistently, we've addressed coexist, and we've addressed keeping peace, and when to speak up, and how can you live in unity, and when should you not live in unity. What does those kind of issues look like? We've addressed homosexuality last week, and this week, the question that has come to me is that of contraception. What do we do with contraception? Now, as soon as I ask this question, I know that there are a few responses. I'm assuming there's a few responses. One might be, I'm single, not dating anyone. This is the last thing that is even on my mind. Why would we take morning to talk about this? We'll see if we can address that. Another, it might be, we're done raising kids. We've moved on to other topics. We don't have to worry about those issues anymore. That's not even a concern for me. The third one might be, I've never really thought about it very much, and I don't even really know why it matters. Why are you bringing this up? Well, partially because it was a question that was asked to me, and I'm trying to answer them. But as I was thinking about this, I was actually thinking, well, is this worth a Sunday? Is this something we should discuss and talk about as the body of Christ? And I recognize that our view of contraception is directly connected to other views that I think are pretty significant. So I'm going to argue that our views of contraception are directly connected to the way we view marriage, the way we view children, the way we view sexuality, and the way we view life. And there might be more, but those are just the ones that came to my mind. And I want to look at our connections this morning. So as we think about the issue of contraception, it's much bigger than that. And I want us to explore those issues because I think they're pertinent to all of us. Now, if you are single, I want to encourage you to think about these sort of things now. Are you looking forward to marriage? Do you think about raising kids? Our culture would tell you, don't think about that right now. Don't worry about it. You're young. You've got a long life ahead of you. Just enjoy your youth. But I don't know where that perspective is in Scripture. I think that it is honored, it is good to think ahead and think through issues before you run into them, so that you have a clear understanding of what you'll do when you get to that. Now, I'm not telling you to just run off and get married tomorrow, but I am encouraging you to think about marriage, think about children, even when, but especially before the Lord brings someone into your life. Think through these things before. So hopefully this morning will spur on some of those thoughts for you. For those of you done raising kids, let me say to you that how you speak about marriage and families and valuing life will have implications on the next generation. And even closer to home, the way that we speak about those sort of issues will have implications on how the younger generation will treat us as older people at the end or part of our life. How they value life. Do they see life based on how God sees it or how the culture sees it? We'll talk about that. It makes a big difference on how we'll get treated as we get older. So I think it makes a difference. And for those of you who say, well, I don't have to worry about it, that's not my issue, I'll just leave that for other people to figure out. I will say, that used to be my argument about abortion. I remember in college or high school, I would say, I'm a man, abortion, that's a woman's issue, I don't have to think about that. If I get someone pregnant, then I'll think about it. That was sort of my response. And I don't know that that's necessarily good rationale. Is it just a thinly veiled complacency when God asks us to represent Him well in all areas of life? Not just the ones that affect me personally, but am I able to give a response when someone asks? So I want to encourage you that thinking rightly about any topic brings glory to God. We should not shy away from or be afraid to hold every topic up to the Word of God and see what it has to say about that. Now, as I've said before in weeks past, we also have to make clear that when we hold things up to the Word of God, we have to recognize some things we just have as opinions, and some things we have to see what the Word of God has to say about it. And we have to be able to distinguish between them. So, what does the Bible say about contraception? Well, I'm going to start again with these questions. What does our view on contraception have to say about our view of children, marriage, sexuality, and life? And we'll look at some of those four areas and see how they're connected to this issue. And I want to start with children and probably actually spend the most time on this. But there's two views to each and every one of these. There's the culture's view and there's the biblical view. And they're almost always completely opposite. Sometimes there's some parallels. But I want to look at, first of all, the culture's view of children. First of all, culture sees children as a burden. I see it and I hear it all the time. Raising kids is a drudgery to be endured. It's like, okay, I got pregnant, we got to get through it the next 20 years, get them out of the house, we can be done. Count down the days until they can be gone. It's seen as just sort of this amazing, just sort of holding me back, keeping me from doing the things that I want to do. Culture also says they're expensive. I looked up the USDA. I don't know how they figure these things out, but they say the average cost to raise a child is $286,050. The $50 is probably piano lesson or something. I mean, I don't know what they're feeding them. That's a lot of money. And that's not counting college either, by the way. That's all before college. So that's the culture. So they're expensive. Are you sure you can afford to have children? Maybe you should get a better job first. And really, only people who have really good jobs should really have kids, according to that. Children are consumers, says our culture. They eat up our hard-earned resources. I spend all this time and energy making money, and then my kids just go and spend it all. And they eat it all. How much money do you spend on diapers? Right?
A lot.
Multiply that times 7. And children, they say, are shameful. You can be embarrassed because you get pregnant too soon. That would be our story. You can be embarrassed because of how many you have. That could be our story. You feel irresponsible. People say, wow, I don't know how many things. Do you know how that happens? Because you know how you have children? Do you know how you can stop that? These are the kind of the questions that we get asked. So maybe it's just us. I don't know. What does that look like? Let me give you the biblical perspective of children. So turn, if you will, to Psalm 127. We're going to look at a few different passages, but Psalm 127 is beautiful, and it's only 5 verses long, so it's actually the last 3 verses. I typed that in wrong. Let's go to Psalm 127. If I get there. Okay. The last 3 verses say this: Behold, children are a gift of the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. How blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. They will not be ashamed when they speak with their enemies in the gates. So looking at that passage, there's some others we can look at, but I want to focus on that one because it tells us a lot of things. First of all, it tells us that children are a gift. They're not a burden. They're an undeserved blessing from God. They produce lots of things, but they produce joy. My children have just blessed my life. My life is better because I have kids than when I didn't. They are a gift from God, and they're undeserved. We don't do anything to earn it. The Bible also says that they are a reward. They're not expensive. They're actually a reward to us. Children are contributors to the family household. Now, this was a lot more clear back in the pioneer days. In the pioneer days, they had lots of kids for a couple reasons. One, because a lot of the kids died young. A lot of them didn't make it through, but they needed help on the farm. They needed more help, and so they had kids because you didn't have to pay them. They were a cheap economy, but they contributed to the family economy. The family economy actually got stronger. They weren't a burden. They weren't expensive. They actually made it better. And the other place you see it is kings. Kings wanted to have kids so they could have someone to turn the kingdom over to. They needed heirs. Even Abraham, if you remember the story in Genesis, he didn't have an heir. And God said he was going to bless Abraham through his seed. And he said, where are they? Where are they? And he finally brought him Isaac. But there was a reward, the sense that the children are contributing to the family economy. The fruit of the womb is a reward. That's all in verse 3. Then we learn that children aren't consumers, but they're actually strength. They're strength. So verse 4 says, like arrows in the hand of a warrior. A warrior is strong, a brave, and a mighty man. By the way, it takes lots of bravery, might, and courage to have lots of kids. You need that strength. But children make a family unit stronger. When people say, when they say we have 7 kids, they're like, oh my goodness, how do you do that? That's so many. I said, well, if I had 7 2-year-olds, I agree, that might just be ridiculous. But the fact is, my kids help each other. They actually make our lives better. Just yesterday, Stacey and I went for a walk, and Ginny came with us. And she said, what about the kids? 2 were napping inside. And I said, these kids can watch them. I said, just if they cry, go get them. And they could, and we could go do that. Now, we couldn't do that if we just had 1 kid. Or you have to take them with you. And so we actually have a stronger family unit because we're helping out one another. Those connections are stronger. They're a strength. And lastly, we see children are not ashamed, but they're actually a source of honor. Verse 5 says, they will not be ashamed when they speak with their enemies in the gate. Children become honorable for us. It's not a shame to have children. It's honorable. It's a good thing. Well, how did Jesus view children? This is important to know. You're probably very familiar with this passage, but it's worth reading anyway. In Mark chapter 10. I'm going to go to this takes place, interestingly, right after Jesus affirmed the sanctity of marriage. People were asking him about divorce, and hey, can we just get divorced? It was a custom. Send to divorce, they could send them away. And Jesus basically said, no, like, you don't understand. God created marriage permanently. And so he's solidifying marriage, and then out of that comes children. And then we see in verse 13, they were bringing children to him so that he might touch them, but the disciples rebuked them. And when Jesus saw this, he was indignant, and he said to them, permit the children to come to me. Do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. And then Jesus goes, as he so often does, makes a living example out of these children. And he says this very remarkable statement. Sometimes we've heard it so much we stop thinking about it. But he says, truly I say to you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God like a child will not enter it at all. That's a big statement. And then he took them in his arms and began blessing them and laying his hands on them and just loving them. That's a good picture. Those pictures are helpful sometimes. So the question, this morning, I'm just going to give us 4 what I'm calling heart checks. Again, along the issue of contraception, but bigger than that. So one question is, what is our view of children? Do we want to use contraception because we view children as burdensome and expensive and consumers and are shame? And then if that's the case, we need to realign our perspective. Children are not something to be avoided, but they are reasons to rejoice in the goodness of God. So our first heart check is this. Is my desire to use contraception because of an unbiblical view of children? Do I need to realign my view of children? Well, let's go on to marriage. 2 different views of marriage. The culture's view of marriage is primarily about my happiness and my fulfillment. I like someone enough, they make my life better, I'm going to marry them. I'm not knocking these sites, but these dating sites that promote compatibility. Sometimes what happens is we want someone who's perfect. They fit us perfectly. We get along wonderfully. There's no problems, and that's sort of the compatibility we're looking for. But a lot of times, God uses our spouse to refine us in the ways that we're different from one another. Can you get some amens from some married people out there? Right? So, some people are afraid to say it. God refines us through those things that are different, the things that cause conflict. And so sometimes we think, I'm not saying go out and marry like the most difficult person you can find, unless you want to be a martyr, but as much as you can, go out and see if you can find the perfect someone. But here's the thing, they don't exist. There is no such thing as a perfect someone. And that's the problem. We fill our heads with too many romantic movies and love stories, and we get this false concept of what godly love is. And godly love loves no matter what. And that you're not gonna find in a compatibility search. So the marriage view, culture view of marriage is really my happiness, my fulfillment. Well, what does Scripture say about marriage? At the very beginning, Genesis 1, there's no better place to turn than the very first marriage. Genesis 1, we list 3 things out of these verses. God said, verses 26 through 28. God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Notice, male and female are both image bearers of God. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. So here we see that we see God's plan for mankind within marriage. And I pulled this off of a website called crosswalk.com, Don and Sally Meredith. They're three, I liked it because they had alliteration, but you can figure them out on your own. You look at God's view for mankind, and there's really three purposes. So the first one is to reflect God's image. God said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness. He created them male and female. So each individual is created in the image of God. But when you get married together as a male and female, you actually are reflecting the image of God in a very unique and special way. So we can recognize our purpose in marriage is to reflect the image of God. And we recognize that when we can do that, we have a witness to a lost world. Do our marriages look like a witness to the lost world? A second purpose under marriage is reproduction. And we talked about that with children, but God told them, be fruitful and increase in number. Marriage is an opportunity for men and women to produce children. Children are a gift from God, like we talked about. And with them comes great responsibility. Children are to be raised in our likeness, in the likeness of God, because we bear God's image. And by the way, spiritually speaking, this is a great joy, because when we talk about discipleship, Jesus said, go therefore and make disciples. What we're doing is, discipleship is really helping someone else come along into the image of God. So you see a beautiful picture of that in marriage through children. You literally see this, they say, a spitting image of that person. But regardless of our marital status, we have the ability to do that spiritually, to help raise people up, to be not in our image, but in the image of God. So that's a pretty cool picture there. And then thirdly, from marriage, we see that God called us to reign. In verse 28, he said, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. So you think about it as married couples, we're to subdue the earth. So we need good stewardship over the physical realm that God has given us, but also over the spiritual realm. We need diligence as married couples in the intentions that God has on earth as he leads and directs us. Now, I want to, speaking about contraception, I want to talk about the Catholics' view on contraception, because they actually take a stand. Protestants don't. They just kind of say, yeah, whatever. And so that's not really that helpful. And I think sometimes in the Protestant world, I tend to just kind of hold back from anything that's Catholic. Like, well, that's Catholic, we're Protestant. But the Catholics, I think, have thought through some things really well. And I think contraception is one of them. So we don't have sort of a papal dictate, like this is mandated, though many Catholics don't follow the papal dictates anyway. But I think what they have thought through about contraception is helpful. So I want to give some thoughts on that here. And just so you know, I'm not like a Catholic authority. I got this, all of my Catholic information came from the dummies.com website, or Catholic for Dummies. So that's where it came from. So anyway, the Catholics say love and life, when love and life, which is unity and procreation, are separated, you think about that. So the purposes of marriage, unity and procreation, when they're separated, then sex becomes an end in itself rather than a means to an end. Birth control then makes sex recreational, and removing what may be perceived as a danger of pregnancy means that couples no longer need to communicate about when and when not to have sex, or whether they want to or can afford another child. Discussions on this topic can actually strengthen the marriage. And so they're saying that contraception is actually pulling apart some of those things of marriage. So what is our view of marriage? Do we want to use contraception because we view marriage about being my happiness and my fulfillment? And a child will get in the way of that. So that's the next heart check question. Is my desire to use contraception because of an unbiblical view of marriage? Is my view of marriage aligned with Scripture? All right, let's look at sexuality now. Sexuality, the culture view says it's about me, it's for me, it's about me, it's for my enjoyment, it's for my pleasure. That's the whole purpose of sex. We talked about that a little bit even last week with homosexuality. When you start to view sex as just about me as a part of a bigger picture than what it is. I want to give you a quote from G.K. Chesterton to give you the beginning of a biblical view of sexuality. He said, sex is an instinct that produces an institution. Think about that. An instinct that produces an institution. It is positive and not negative, noble and not base, creative and not destructive, because it produces this institution. That institution is the family, a small state or commonwealth which has hundreds of aspects when it is once started that are not sexual at all. If you catch that. So sex is like the beginning of it, but there's so much more that is supposed to be connected to sex. That includes worship, justice, festivity, decoration, instruction, comradeship, repose. Sex is the gate of that house, and romantic and imaginative people naturally like looking through a gateway. But the house is very much larger than the gate. There are indeed a certain number of people who like to hang about the gate and never get any further. So sex is really, biblically speaking, it's an instinct that produces an institution, the institution of marriage and of a family, which we've been talking about. Some other things we can gather about sex. Again, to quote my sources, this guy's got a tough name, but his last name is Budzinski, I think. And this was on focusonthefamily.com. He gave 3 reasons about why sex is good. The first is that of procreation. Again, we've talked about this. You should notice some themes here. But sex is good because God said it was good, and he said, use this to be fruitful and multiply, part of the dominion of the earth. You recognize that God could have created us any way he wanted to. He could have had us reproduce. We could just think things and babies could be there. But he gave us sex as a means for that to happen. It is good. It's part of his plan. Sex is good because it creates a union between a man and a woman. God didn't give Adam a man or an animal or a crowd of people, but a woman. Somebody different than he, yet made in God's image, just like he was. And when Adam first gazed upon his new companion, he was so astonished he cried, "This at last is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh." Notice, first of all, that Adam, when he looked at Eve, he actually looked at her physical appearance. He said, she's beautiful. She's stunning. And there was a union that was created. And lastly, sex is good, a bit of a mouthful, but it's a living emblem of his sacrificial love for the church, of Christ's love for the church, and the church's adoring response. So we see in that sex that there's this picture of Christ in the church that we can't really even understand or put into words, but Paul, in fact, just calls it one of God's secrets. He says, this mystery is a profound one, but I'm saying it refers to Christ and the church. So we see that sex is an instinct, produced an institution, it's good, and also it is pleasurable. But we have to talk about that because the culture also says, well, sex is for my pleasure. It is pleasurable, but pleasure has to be a byproduct. God created it pleasurable, but if you seek pleasure for pleasure's sake alone, what happens is you actually lose it. It disappears. If anyone's in philosophy, that's called a hedonistic paradox. If you seek pleasure, it disappears. But also, pleasure can steer you wrong because you can get pleasure from doing wrong things or from doing right things. So it's not a good moral compass. But when you do good things, and you may have experienced this, if you do something good, or you serve someone, or you love someone, you experience the joy of that. There's pleasure in serving somebody well. But that's a byproduct. If you do it for that reason, you're doing it for the wrong reason. Again, let me go back to the Catholic Church. They say, artificial contraception is morally wrong because each and every sex act can occur only between husband and wife and must be directed toward 2 ends, love and life. That is, the intimate unity between the man and woman, that's love, and possibly procreating another human being, life. So conception and pregnancy don't have to occur each time, but no man-made barriers should prevent what God may intend to happen. That's from the Catholic Church. So what is our view of sexuality? Do we want to use contraception because we view sexuality as being about me and my enjoyment and my pleasure, and having a baby would get in the way of that? That leads us to our next heart check. Is my desire to use contraception because of an unbiblical view of sexuality? All right, so this takes us to the last one, the view of life. 2 views about life. Culture says, my life is valuable. My life is valuable. They would say that. And as long as people are useful to society, they can be valuable too. The problem is, if something or someone is not useful to society, that's questionable. So that could be end of life, right? You could say, well, they're not producing to society anymore, they're not useful. Or a baby. You know, a baby does not really do much to contribute to society for years, sometimes decades. So if a life, like a baby, comes into my life that messes with my life's plan, the high value of my life, because my life is valuable, dictates that I have the right to get rid of that lesser life because it's not contributing to society anyway. So this is the problem. We start to judge life. Well, what does the Bible say about life? The Bible says that all life is valuable. And our value comes from not what society says, but what God says about life. That means that no matter what, how useless, how broken, how incomplete, how inadequate any human life is, it's it's valuable because it's made in God's image, not because of what it produces to society. That's a great message of hope, specifically for babies and young people, as they are incredibly useful in life. But so we see the beautiful picture of this. The picture passage I want you to turn to is Psalm 139. And again, some of these are really familiar passages because they're beautiful. They're poetic. Well, why are they so familiar? Why are they so important? Because they're addressing really key issues, but they're addressing them in just gorgeous words and imagery. And so this is Psalm 139, verses 13 through 16. I encourage you, sometime today or this week, just read all of Psalm 139. The whole psalm is beautiful, but I just want to get a few verses in there to see the value, how God values life. It says, "You formed my inward parts. You wove me in my mother's womb." Again, before we were even born, God is weaving us together. "I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden for you when I was made in secret, and skillfully wrought in the depths of the earth. Your eyes have seen my unformed substance, and in your book were all written the days that were ordained for me, when as yet there was not one of them." God knows our life from beginning to end before we even created. Even in the womb, when we're made from dust, He's literally like forming us together. It's a beautiful picture. The Catholic Church says about life, the worst aspect of birth control pills is that many of them aren't true contraceptives. And that is, they don't prevent the sperm and egg from conceiving. Instead, they work as an abortifacient. You have to do some research and see what that means. But it causes the uterus to reject potentially fertilized eggs. In other words, if you look at contraception and birth control, they are not all equal. So some of them allow things to get fertilized, but then they don't have any place to stick, and they leave the woman's body. And that is, according to God's view, is a human life, no matter how small, because it's not based on productivity, but on value, on God's image. And so Catholicism holds that life begins at conception, so any fertilized egg is an embryo in a human person. So even when you look, not all contraception is equal. So, what is our view of life? Do we want to use contraception because we view life based on productivity to myself, or to society, or based even just on my own personal convenience? Which leads us to our last heart check. Is my desire to use contraception because of an unbiblical view of life? So we look at all four of these. Now, to answer the question that was asked in the very beginning, I don't think the Bible is clear enough on contraception to forbid it. I don't say don't do it at all. That's a Catholic view, and we could have discussions about that. But I do think it gives us reason to pause and consider our motives for wanting to use it. So if we look at all these, if we can recognize that God values children, if we can agree that God designed marriages not solely for procreation, but certainly that's one of the purposes, if we can come into agreement with God having created us as sexual beings, if we can align the way we view life with how God views life, if we can pass all of those heart checks, then I believe you can make an argument for using non-abortifacient contraception. As my mentor told me when we were on kid number 3 or 4 or 5, I forgot. But he said the number of kids the Lord gives us is in God's hands. It's the Lord's hands. But we get to be a part of the decision. He was encouraging us to maybe think about how many kids we're having. But I don't believe that really the goal is number of kids. It's not about if you have 1 or a dozen. I really believe the goal is to raise God-honoring children, regardless of the number. And even if you have none yourself, then invest your time and energy into other people's children. There are plenty of children that need help. If you want to help invest in some, just look over here. You got plenty. When thinking about contraception, I think the issue really is more about aligning our thinking, our views, and our decisions off of how God reveals Himself in Scripture, rather than what culture tells us is the right thing to do. If you've got anything, you've seen that there's a distinction between the biblical view and the cultural view. And once we've done that, I think we can proceed with confidence in all of our decisions, not just about contraception, but about children, marriage, sexuality, and all of life.